Macroeconomic models are ways of predicting the behavior of the economy, and there are two models that dominate modern thinking: the classical model and the Keynesian model. The classical model was popular before the Great Depression and argues the economy is self-adjusting. In good times, wages and prices rise, while in bad times, wages and prices fall. Prior to the Depression, this model seemed to hold true because small fluctuations occurred in the business cycle. The Depression, however, resulted in a major failure of the classical model as the economy did not self-adjust, and the effects were severe and widespread. In response, the Keynesian model was developed, which posits that the economy is not self-adjusting, and governments must implement fiscal policies in order to stabilize economic fluctuations. Classical economic theory focuses on a long-run approach to achieving growth. The classical theory holds the economy will fluctuate around full employment, gross domestic product, and a rate of natural unemployment. Two assertions are made in the classical theory. First, the main focus is on producing more output, which is determined at the full employment level of GDP. Second, advocates of the classical theory assert that wages and prices are flexible and will adjust back to full employment GDP in the long run. Therefore, intervention by government to assist in economic downturns is not supported by the classical theory, and the government should focus less on short-term fluctuations in GDP and more on growing full employment GDP by keeping tax rates low, and allow businesses to make optimal investment decisions by increasing competition and removing monopolies. The classical theory strongly favors supply-side policies that help to increase and shift the long-run aggregate supply curve, thus increasing real GDP and keeping price levels low. Other policies the classical theory supports to achieve long-run economic growth are savings and investments, education, technology, and research and development. This model essentially translates to letting markets take the lead and having an emphasis on long-run aggregate supply. The classical theory also views the Phillips curve as vertical, which implies that there is no negative relationship between unemployment and inflation in the long run. The argument is that the natural rate of unemployment is also vertical, and fluctuations in unemployment vary around this natural rate. An economy without government assistance adjusts back to its long-run potential output. The policy implication is that the government should instead keep inflation rates low. The Keynesian theory argues that something should be done to smooth out business cycles to keep employment levels consistent and close to a rate of full employment, and to keep inflation at a low, consistent rate. While in the long run there is an upward trend towards the full employment level of GDP, the reality is that certain phases of the business cycle have a negative impact on lives, and the return to full employment GDP may take a long period of time. Keynesian models focus on short-run fluctuations in the business cycle instead of solely focusing on long-term growth. Aggregate demand is a key aspect with respect to production because it provides incentives to hire labor and bring production closer to full employment GDP. In the short run, wages and prices are sticky as opposed to flexible, so they do not respond to an increase or decrease in aggregate demand, and an excess of supply is created. Under the Keynesian view, the government should implement an expansionary fiscal policy in cases of recessionary gaps, and should implement a contractionary fiscal policy in times of inflationary gaps. These policies focus on shifting aggregate demand to hopefully smooth out short-run fluctuations in business cycles.